I'm David Cycleback. I live in Seattle. The Seattle area has several UU congregations, including a few large and influential ones. I attend a congregation on the west side that, as with most congregations, is filled with lovely, interesting people. It has encountered many of the issues and controversies that UU congregations and groups have recently encountered across the country, including related to the pandemic and differences of opinions about the UUA. As many know, the national UU membership has dropped precipitously recently. RE membership has been decimated. There is a shortage of ministers, and there have been a record number of mutual separations of ministers from their congregations. Further, attendance to GA dropped by a quarter this year, even though virtual attendance should theoretically increase attendance. Hundreds of congregations do not send any delegates to GA. The reasons for these disturbing, dysfunctional trends is a matter of debate, and no doubt there will be multiple reasons. I don't present just one. As many know, I'm one of the more vocal and public dissenters against the new UU illiberalism, censorship, and extreme identity politics. I'd written numerous assorted essays on the topic, including that have appeared at the Fifth Principle Project and the UU MUAC newsletter. In part because I didn't want to write about these issues forever and I have other things to do in my life, I decided to assemble some of the essays and compose a few new ones and put them in a short book. Additionally, I added two excellent essays by Monroe Sycophus, a UU minister, and UU writer Jim Aiken. As a minister and UU seminary graduate, Star King, Monroe had an insider's viewpoint I couldn't provide, and I thought Jim's essay had an interesting and informative perspective on why there is a theological schism in UU. Anyway, I hope you all read the book. However, I want to briefly highlight, I think, some key points of the book and counter some misconceptions and prejudgments that people who have not read the book may have. First of all, the main and overriding theme of the book is against illiberalism. That's the title. There are all sorts of issues and debates about critical race theory, liberalism, theology, politics, governance, and all that. But the main point of the book is to take a stand against illiberalism, censorship, dogmatism, authoritarianism, and expectations of ideological conformity. The book isn't even so much about being for liberalism as being against illiberalism. Liberalism itself can be debated, and as with all ideologies, is imperfect. The current illiberalism, censorship, dogmatism, and expectations of ideological conformity in UUA are simply not to be tolerated. Those things should not be tolerated wherever they appear, whether in the left, center, or right, religious, social, or political spheres, Russia, or in the United States. Those things oppress all groups, including minorities. Civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X said freedom of speech and expression are essential to social justice and minority rights. Cornel West has strongly stood up against modern trends towards censorship and cancel culture. Despite the mental gymnastics by the UUA and critical race theorists, anyone who examines them sincerely knows that Martin Luther King Jr.'s views and the I Have a Dream speech directly oppose most of critical race theory's tenets. University of Chicago professor Jerry Coyne recently wrote exactly about this in his popular blog, and you may want to look it up. Democracy, learning, education, community health, growth, science, and yes, racial and social justice require the exchange of ideas, freedom of speech and belief, people expressing new and bold ideas, and listening to each other. Many have said that the new UU leaders are not radicals, but reactionaries. They are neo-Puritans trying to bring UU back to Puritanism, where shaming, excommunication, and thought control were rules of the game. I actually find the current censorship, calling out and silencing of people I see in national UU to simply be childish. It's infantile. It embarrasses UU in the eyes of the world. It's treating UUs as if they are children who shouldn't be allowed to think for themselves. It's not how well-adjusted, intelligent adults act. I live in uber progressive Seattle, which rivals San Francisco in its leftist politics. When I talk to people outside of UU here in Seattle, including people much further politically left to me, they are dumbfounded and flabbergasted at what is going on in the UUA. Some of it, such as removing the word stand from the slogan standing on the side of love because the word stand is harmful, they find laughable and hard to believe. One woman thought I was joking when I told her that. Another woman said it is self-evident that freedom of speech supports minority rights and racial justice, and found it bizarre that the current UUA argues otherwise. One thing that I discuss in this book and provide a lot of data for is that the UUA's extreme ideas do not represent the views of most minorities in this country. The far left and extreme woke is a very small and disproportionately white and culturally elite group. It is a socially and culturally privileged group. Multiple polls have shown this. Within the Democratic Party, the far left proportion is disproportionately white, with racial minorities tending to be in the more moderate and conservative parts of the party. The UUA's positions, such as abolish the police and extreme politically correct language policing and telling congregations to never call the police, are unpopular with and even outright rejected by most minorities in this country. So much of what the UUA promotes as papal bulls is what most minorities in this country don't want or believe. Of course, it's fine for some UUs to have fringe views. I'm Jewish, and Jews have a wide diversity of views on all topics. UU is about diversity of views, and I'm sure some UUs are communists. More power to them. Let's hear what they have to say. However, they shouldn't represent their fringe views as majority views or the only authentic voice of minorities. And they most certainly shouldn't shame and smear UUs who share views with most minorities in this country. If you disagree with the fund the police slogan that the UUA still promotes, you are in agreement with most Blacks, Asians, and Latinos in this country. Numerous national polls have shown this. If you don't use the word Latinx, you are in agreement with the vast majority of Latinos who reject the term. UU congregants have been labeled racist, alt-right, and causing harm simply for agreeing with what the majority of racial and ethnic minorities in this country believe. And I don't understand how the UUA thinks it will attract many minorities to UU by having extreme positions and views that most minorities reject. I once said that the UUA's extremism and expectations that everyone follow extremist views is how you end up with a really tiny church, and ironically, a really tiny church that most minorities will not want to join. In many aspects, the UUA seems to have this utopian, pie-in-the-sky vision that is untethered to reality in the real world. They want all UUs to reject liberalism and freedom of belief and all become radicals. That wish is untethered to reality. Many minorities and marginalized people, from racial minorities to gay and trans people to the disabled and people with mental disorders, have said that the extremist views promoted by vocal extremist activists, such as within the current UUA, not only don't represent their views, but hurt the cause. Minorities, as much as anyone, can be silenced and scared to speak their truth for fears of being shamed and smeared by the vocal extremists. As I write in my book, a disabled Jewish congregant recently left UU saying he was scared to speak his views in UU forums. One thing I notice about many national leaders in calling UU's white supremacy and wrong thinkers and saying normal UU culture is oppressive and bad and saying people who don't change their ways of thinking should leave the church It makes it appear as if the national UU leadership has an essential disdain and disrespect for most UU laity and congregants. Between this and being against liberalism and freedom of belief and freedom of expression, it makes me wonder why they want to be members of a liberal church with people they disrespect. If you are against liberalism, why would you want to be a member of a liberal religion? Removing liberalism from a liberal religion is like removing Jesus Christ from Christianity. I do want to point out some areas that the other side, for lack of better words, has right. There are legitimate concerns about American society and UU and congregations, and most UUs on both sides of the debate agree with many of these points and concerns. I touch on a few. Liberalism hasn't so far solved racial disparities. We have to do more. While the UUA says this means liberalism and Enlightenment values should be thrown out, I would argue that these institutions should be improved. However, I don't think any UU argues that racism has been solved and that there are no disparities. I don't know anyone who supports liberalism who says liberalism is perfect and shouldn't be continually improved and worked on. Another correct point of the UU is UU has long been shrinking and congregations tend to skew to being older and white. This has to be addressed for the future health of the church. There's no question that some things have to be changed in an increasingly multicultural and diverse country to keep the church healthy and expand it and attract a younger generation. It is true that UU has a particular traditional culture and structure that tends to be white and Northern European, and this can make it uncomfortable and even intimidating for many minorities. I agree that UU and congregations have to work on how to become more welcoming and inclusive to different people who are attracted to UU beliefs. One of my areas of research is neurodiversity, or people with mental disorders who often have difficulty fitting in with the dominant culture. The issues of becoming welcoming and inclusive are areas I specialize in. In fact, an academic book I am currently working on with a medical scientist in England is to be titled Neurodiversity in the Workplace. Another thing that the UU has right, it is true that American history books, entertainment, and dominant culture have been white-centric and patriarchal. Listening to and including, uplifting, as they say, other voices is essential. As I'm Jewish and neurodivergent, autistic, and bipolar, this means the UUA should be listening to and uplifting my voice. The UUA activists are also correct that UU does not have a central theology, and UU at times can be aimless and a free-for-all. I understand why the UUA is trying to create a central theology and mission. Others have long discussed this issue. How do you address these and other issues most all UUs agree are issues are big questions. Obviously, I don't think authoritarianism, censorship, and dogmatism is the way to go. Now, the big heated debate in UU these days is about critical race theory. And I write quite a bit about this in my book. I criticize critical race theory and do not support it. I'm against racial essentialism, caste systems, groupthink, and simplistic models wherever they appear. I don't think you fight racism with racism, and I think racial essentialism is bad wherever it appears, whether in the right or the left. And I know numerous UUs consider critical race theory as an inherently authoritarian, dogmatic, Orwellian ideology. You certainly get that personal perspective from Dick Burkhart in his review of my book. However, I take a much more balanced view and don't so much criticize critical race theory as dogmatic critical race theory and those extremists who present it as dogma, the one and only truth about the world, and want it to be the only lens to view society, people, history, and UU. I take a more balanced view for a number of reasons. First of all, there is no one critical race theory. It is a broad body of work that is considered, thought of, and applied in different ways. Different critical race theorists have different views and approaches. Though they're not critical race theorists, Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi disagree with each other in fundamental areas. The second reason I take a more balanced view and pragmatic view about critical race theory is I know some critical race theorists who are not dogmatic and are very reasonable. They don't believe in censorship or cancel culture and shaming and name calling people. They believe in freedom of expression and agree that Robin DiAngelo's shaming teaching techniques are counterproductive. Thus, in my book, I in particular criticize dogmatic critical race theory and activists who treat it as dogma and the only lens and that everyone must follow it. Alas, the UU treats critical race theory as dogma. And for many UUs, their introduction and experience of critical race theory is the UUA's dogmatic, authoritarian, heavy-handed version of it. The UUA has tainted critical race theory in the eyes of many. And this leads to another key point. I'm against extremism. The UUA has some good ideas and legitimate concerns, but either wants to throw out the baby with the bathwater or take the good ideas to destructive extremes. As the famous quote goes, any virtue can become a vice when it's taken to the extremes. And I figured the best way to end this little introduction is for me to read the last short chapter of the book. There is no one or objectively correct way to tackle issues of racial, ethnic, and other oppression and inequalities. Any model is at best limited, imperfect, and situational and involves trade-offs. While a variety of approaches can be useful, I know that authoritarianism, dogmatism, and illiberalism are not amongst them. Authoritarianism, dogmatism, and illiberalism are oppressive, including of minorities. We all have our theories, personal ideologies, and subjective ways of looking at the world. The great philosopher Thomas Kuhn wrote, "People see the world through their theories." The problem is when people try to force everyone to adhere to their theory. People and groups who think they've discovered the one true universal truth and the one correct way of viewing the world, and that everyone must follow it, are tragic stories as old as humankind. Sadly, as it's an innate trait in human psychology, such fanaticism is found within every new generation. We see it today within today's UU. This book argues for liberalism, the open exchange of ideas, and freedom of speech and expression. I'm not an absolutist, so no slippery slope arguments. It argues for the importance of learning to and listening from others' perspectives and ideas, and to expand our knowledge and understanding. These are essential for democracy, a collective search for truth, and healthy societies, communities, and personal relationships. Having and maintaining liberal, tolerant communities and institutions that support the respectful exchange of ideas are not passive activities. Illiberalism and censorship don't always come in the form of edicts or rules from authority. They can come via groupthink and crowd following, peer pressure, and going along to get along. Self-censorship is censorship. They can come from a culture that doesn't actively foster freedom of expression and dialogue. Thomas Sowell wrote, "Freedom is unlikely to be lost all at once and openly. It is far more likely to be eroded away bit by bit amid glittering promises and expressions of noble ideas." Learn, practice, and promote critical thinking.